welcome to this next episode of the Midwives Cauldron podcast, where we answer your questions. I know, I left you on a bit of a cliffhanger last week. It was really mean of me. But here you go. Enjoy this next episode. I'm Katie James, and this is the Midwives Cauldron podcast. Each episode, I'm joined by my incredible co-host, Dr. Rachel Reed. Listen in as we hubble, bubble, toil and trouble our way through aspects of womanhood, midwifery, birth and lactation. So go on, subscribe now, and hear us on your favourite podcast host.
No, this is one of our favourite topics, least favourite. So we talk about this all the time and then go, oh no, we can't talk about that. So we're going to talk about it, Katie. Are you ready?
No.
Some women, myself included, don't want to have children. This is seen as an almost rejection of our purpose or womanhood. Is this something you guys have come across? This is interesting to me as a woman who has children, because this is a huge issue, I think, in midwifery and just birth work in general. We have, as women, we have been socialized, and, for years and years, it's been reinforced that our primary function is to make babies and raise babies, and that all comes naturally to us, and that's what we should be wanting to do, and that should fulfill us, and it does for a lot of women, but it also doesn't for a lot of women. And when you come into being a midwife, you bring all of your shit with you. I do a lot of work with the student midwives around what is it you're bringing, and really unpicking that. And you can be bringing a lot more with you when you have experience of being a mother that you have to undo, because it's not relevant to the women you're caring for. In fact, it can disrupt your relationship with them, because what you did with your children can come across in the way in which you care for that woman, and it's not relevant to her. So I often get women saying to me, oh, so did you give your baby vitamin K, or questions like that? And I can't answer that. I actually deflect it back onto them and reinforce them as the expert by saying, I'm not going to tell you what I did with my children. And the reason I'm not is because this is your child and this is your decision. And it's really important that you make the right decision for you, which might be completely different to my decision. So there's all of that stuff you've got to navigate if you've got children and you're a midwife. That if you haven't got children, you don't have to. And I also, see, I'm on my high horse now. I also don't, as a woman who has children, I don't see that as my defining identity. So I see myself as a human, a woman who has taken a role of mothering and mothered two children who, of course, I think are amazing and the best thing in the world, because that's what mothers do. But that is not who I am. That is a role that I've taken on. And it's, I always flinch when I'm asked, do you have children, in situations where I think, well, what difference would it make? If I'm doing a presentation on research, does it matter if I've had children or not? Does that validate what I'm saying, or does it invalidate it? Does it, and I get that women bond with that. So women try and kind of find a bond with you in that I'm also a mother and we have this thing in common. But, I'm not a nurturer by nature, I guess.
She's terrible, listeners. She's so mean to me.
I mean, my husband is actually more of a nurturer than I am, and he did a lot of the early. I was the primary carer for first baby, second baby. I went back to work pretty quickly, part-time, because I wanted something outside of mothering, and he was actually a better mother than I was in terms of that early mothering, nurturing, giving. It doesn't come naturally to me. So I guess that's an interesting question, in that we've got to be really careful around working in an area that is all about kind of how amazing women are as mothers, without making women feel that's all that they are, and that they have no worth if they are not mothers.
Absolutely.
Some of the best midwives I have worked with have not been mothers of children. You mother all kinds of other people in different ways through your life, but they've not brought with them that experience, and they can really meet the woman where she is, not bringing their baggage, which you do. And I had to do a lot of work on the baggage that I brought in to midwifery because I had babies by the time I became a midwife. So that's my rant. I'm getting off the box and handing it over to you now, Katie.
Well, I'm baggageless, if that's what you want to call it. I've been totally outed. So this is the perfect question for us because I don't have children. And yeah, it's been sometimes tricky to navigate. And I felt particularly in the breastfeeding world, it has been difficult to navigate because if you look up any private lactation consultant online, they will always state, I am a proud mother of, or I'm a proud grandmother and mother of X amount of children. And whenever I've spoken, I've been asked for my bio, which I've given. And then they've said, oh, how many children do you have? And I said, I don't have any children. And they feel really awkward and don't know what to say. And it's like I've suddenly become a pariah, or I am just this childless, which I particularly hate that phrase because there is nothing less of me. I made the decision not to have children for a few reasons. And also, I think as a birth worker, we need to be incredibly mindful of what we say and what we ask. And I remember being in a bit of a ranty pants mood once. And I had a student midwife, and the first time she worked with me, she was lovely. But within a few minutes, she said to me, how many children do you have? And instead of being my normal, nice, oh, actually, I don't have any children, almost making me be like I'm apologizing that I don't want to make you feel bad because you've said a bad question, I said, you're really lucky that you've asked that question to me because that doesn't make me upset.
Oh, Katie.
I know, it was really bad. And I said, because there are a lot of people.
No, that's awesome.
There are a lot of people in this field that you will work with who don't have children, but desperately, desperately wanted them. And they couldn't. You will have people who have had children and lost them. You never know. And we should not assume because we are working in this field, you have children because you are a terrible person, or you don't have children because you're a terrible person. There can be a whole lot of reasons. And one of them can be, I don't want children. But do you know what? I'm still a nice person. I still love people. I still can be a good woman or human being, and I can be caring. And I feel that that's what I am. But I was really like this poor student. And I apologized and I was kind to her afterwards, but I had to say, this is your biggest learning. You must assume that also when you meet a woman who's come in and it might say, you might not have read her notes. If you haven't read her notes, but you know she's had babies before, don't assume that she's had a successful or a pregnancy that's come with a live baby, or she hasn't had terrible trauma, or she hasn't lost a child. Read those notes because we should never be assuming. Also, please don't put value upon my worth as a lactation consultant and midwife of 20 years because I don't have children. I base my skill set on what I read, what I watch in terms of how I observe women, how I listen to women. I come with no biases. I'm not a better lactation consultant because I've breastfed a baby for 6 years or 3 babies over 6 years or whatever. I'm also not less of one. If you've done that, that's amazing and it's wonderful. And I applaud you and I applaud my friends and my colleagues, and it's marvelous. And I am the best and greatest auntie. I love it. I get really like, out of me and Rachel, I'm the one who cries at everything.
She's the Katie mama to my daughter.
I am Katie mama. If I was a GP, I don't have to have had every single illness to be a good GP. You know, I don't have to have had a baby to know what it's like. I can observe that. And also, if we're saying this, what are we saying about male midwives that they're no good, that they can't possibly understand or empathize. And that's the difference. It's not about saying, well, from my perspective, I felt this, so she must also be feeling this. None of us feel the same or experience things in the same way. So there you go. That's my ranty pants. So next time I'm invited to speak, please don't ask me how many kids I've got, because you might get the same answer that I gave that poor student midwife. So thank you. It's a great question. And now I've outed myself.
I've outed myself as something worse, someone with children who doesn't identify as strongly with being mother.
Yeah, and you hand off your daughter to me to be the mother.
Look, not every woman. I actually think if I had babies when I was 18, I probably wouldn't have gotten around to having them, because there wouldn't have been any other reason I would have thought of to have babies. But, you know, I love them. I've learned
I'm bloody
lots
glad
from
you
them,
did, because I love them as well.
But yeah, it's like not, but this is what women do, you know, and men don't do it. You know, men's social media feeds are not full of their children and their children's meals and them trying to demonstrate they're good fathers constantly. Whereas that is a lot of what women, you know, you go to meetings and they're not about anything to do with midwifery, you know, like in academics, people will ask the women, oh, have you got children? And the women will talk about their children and the men will talk about the thing we've come to talk about. And it kind of irks me a bit, because yeah, that's my ranty pants too. Here you go, Katie. Next question. This popped through my head the other day. I was talking to a woman about supply and how women used to be given a pint of stout. What are your thoughts on non-alcoholic beer that is quite popular now as a herbal galactogogue? Galactogogue?
Galactogogue.
You can pronounce.
Galactogogue. Actually, I always spell it galactologa. It is gog. Galactogogue. I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong. Herbal galactogogue or galactogogues are something you can take to increase your milk supply. So, you know, one of the biggest reasons that women stop breastfeeding is due to perceived or real low milk supply. So basically, we have seen as far back in the records as 2000 BC, women being prescribed beer as an aid for breastfeeding, along with other foods which are really popular. So we hear about fenugreek a lot now, oats. They also would use anise. But beer developed this reputation as a galactogogue.
So is that the pint of Guinness that was traditional?
Yes, and this was very traditional and very big in the sort of 70s, 80s. You know, Guinness used to even advertise this. You could see adverts for it, and it would be full of goodness, Guinness or something. So, you know, they were doing well. And I mean, I've heard stories of older midwives say to me, yeah, we used to pour them half a pint every morning. I don't know why it was it. Maybe it wasn't the morning, maybe it was every afternoon. And they would leave it on their side with their meds. Like, here's your paracetamol and half a pint of Guinness. Were you never told those stories by midwives in the UK? I know. It's me getting in the postnatal world. Yeah. And I would be like, new midwife going, what? Basically, there is limited amount of research on this. But some studies drew a link between a polysaccharide, which is a type of carbohydrate that is present in barley hops, and an increase in the hormone prolactin. This is the hormone that sort of makes the milk, so to speak. And you get this prolactin surge throughout the feed, and then it really peaks after a feed, which sort of makes those milk-making cells make milk for the next feed. And so these are the factors that might explain why beer drinkers of the past sensed that the drink had this beneficial effect on their capacity to produce milk. But what we need to bear in mind, and as this listener has quite rightly said, there is alcohol in beer. So the problem with alcohol is it does the reverse. And actually, if you regularly drink alcohol, you will reduce your milk supply. Aside from the fact of it will go through to the baby, but that's another thing. And
unless it's wine.
Unless it's wine. Oh, yeah, because that definitely doesn't go through to baby, so you can drink as much as you like. Please do not listen to the last thing I said. There is a very good app called, I think it's called Safe to Feed, and you can look that up, and it's from the Australian Breastfeeding Association. And they have very good information about alcohol and breastfeeding, just so you know. But regular use of alcohol is an anti-galactogogue. It will reduce your milk supply. So what are my thoughts on non-alcoholic beer? To be honest, there's no research on it, but it's a bloody interesting question. Again, I would think it was from the yeast and the hops. So we see these in lactation cookies and those types of things. But I'm just going to do my disclaimer now as well, which is, again, just like tongue tie, it's like the whole internet of breastfeeding seems to be lactation cookies and tongue tie. And that's all that I seem to see. I have a bit of a bugbear with lactation cookies and things. One.
So everybody listening needs to tag Katie into any post on social media that's about tongue ties or lactation cookies. Go.
Luckily, no one knows my real Instagram. Don't you dare. Okay. So the whole thing, there is a million different lactation cookies or brands that you can buy out there now, and they are expensive and they're beautifully packaged and beautifully marketed. Essentially, I do not have a problem with it. Eating foods or taking herbs that can help increase your milk supply when you need it for whatever reason that may be. It might be that the mum got really quite sick and she just needs a boost. You know, absolutely. I've cooked foods like this for friends to help support their lactation. But if a mother has low milk supply, a magic pill of fenugreek or a magic pill of a lactation cookie alone, with no proper support to look at the reason why she's got low milk supply, or to look at a reason how to actually increase milk supply, is going to do very little, if anything. The way a body makes milk is the supply and demand, or basically demand and then it supplies. If you don't remove milk from the breast, it will not replace it. 2, also herbs. As a midwife and lactation consultant, I am not a qualified herbalist. Herbs have side effects and they can interact with other medications. We need to be really cautious as midwives and lactation consultants handing out advice about herbs that we don't have qualifications for. So when people ask me, I always recommend they go and speak to the naturopath or the herbalist that's within the health food store, or they seek out their own naturopath. I talk about foods because you're not really going to overdose on fennel or oatmeal. But this is when I get irked. If you've got low milk supply, talk to someone who has some expertise in breastfeeding and lactation knowledge. Remember the simple equation. What you demand. I forgot. I forgot the simple equation.
Well, that rant fizzled.
That's it. I'm not saying any more. My rant's gone. And oxytocin. I've just had a big release of oxytocin by laughing. That's also bloody important. So think about the basics before we start doing all of that. There, rant over. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question.
You know.
So Rachel, a question for you. Why is vaginal breech birth so rare? And is it possible for future midwives to relearn vaginal breech skills? And I'm going to mix this with the other question, which is it impossible to deliver twins vaginally if twin A is breech? Where can I find evidence-based information about twin pregnancy birth?
Well, that was a bit sneaky combining them, wasn't it?
I know. I'm sorry. I just was like, there's 2 lots of breech there. It's interesting. Let's put them together.
And they're actually both variations. So both of these are variations, normal variations of pregnancy to have a breech baby, and it's a normal variation to have twins. But because with variations, there are increased chance of particular complications relating to that variation. And in the kind of risk-averse culture, birth culture we're in, it's like everyone's going to die. We have to do stuff. And they're 2 separate, I guess they're 2 separate to some extent situations. So the reason that breech birth is so rare is because the term breech trial came about, and you know, we've talked about before how once research comes out that supports what people want to do, it goes straight into practice versus research that comes out that doesn't support it and it takes, you know, over a decade to then come into practice.
Yeah.
So the term Breech trial came around and was this when we were training or just after we'd finished training,
Yeah,
Katie? I can't remember.
I think so. Around that
Can't
time.
remember this.
Can't remember the exact date.
And overnight, the policy in the hospital went from if a woman comes in labour, in spontaneous labour, and it's all good, then the baby just comes out of a vagina if it's breech. And then it turned to actually every woman who comes in, even in labour with a breech birth, with a breech baby, will be recommended to have a cesarean. Because the term breech trial showed that there were worse outcomes for breech babies. But, you know, since then, even the authors of that study came out and said, no, you can't say that because, you know, the way, the methodology, the way in which it was done can't be interpreted in that way because a lot of these births were happening in facilities globally that didn't have medical support. They were happening with babies who had died before labour, babies who had congenital abnormalities. So it was just a bit of a mess, but it didn't matter because it said what we wanted it to say. Since then, there's been some pretty big studies, one in Canada, can't remember them off the top of my head, that have basically said that, look, vaginal breech birth has specific risks attached to it, which tend to be right at the end of labour and birth, but actually the outcome for the babies is no worse long term. So it's not, in fact, the Canadian obstetricians said, you know, women should be offered, it's interesting to offer them a vaginal birth for breech. So we've had a bit of a change in that it is moving back towards an interest in supporting vaginal breech births, even in hospital settings. But the problem is they're doing it in such a way that will increase risks for vaginal breech birth. So there tends to be, all right, you can have a vaginal breech birth, but we're going to do all these things to you that make it likely that your baby's going to get stuck. So then that reinforces to us that it's dangerous. You know, the epidural on your back, the worst positions, you know, the baby, the way in which the baby comes out, it's not going to work if a woman's on her back with an epidural. Having said that, there are some real experts still that we need to tap into and spread it far and wide who still understand physiological breech birth and are kind of reigniting people's interest in it. We've got Andrew Bissetts, who's an obstetrician in Australia, Jane Evans, who's a UK midwife who's done lots of physiological breech births and home births, and Maggie Banks in New Zealand. So if you're interested, go and tap into what their teachings are because they've got some really good resources on supporting physiological breech birth. So the theory is there and it can be reclaimed. What we need is for midwives and obstetricians to see it, as Katie was saying before, you know, if you don't see it, you don't learn it. It's one thing doing it in a textbook, and I teach physiological breech birth. I've only seen 3. That's how, because women often don't have it, and to some extent, the only way you can have one is to find somebody who can support you or do it outside the system.
Yeah.
So we need to reclaim those skills. The skills are still there. We need to reclaim them and we need to support women to birth vaginally so that we can practice those skills, which are pretty much doing nothing. It's physiological. It's about doing nothing. Supporting the woman's instincts and physiology, and then knowing when the baby needs help and when she needs help and how to do that. And it's actually pretty simple, the maneuvers and things. And then in terms of twins, twins are another variation. There's more twins happening because women who have assisted reproduction are more likely to have twins. So we're seeing increasing twins. And I'm sure you're seeing them out the other end breastfeeding.
Oh, definitely increase. And of course, then an increase, they become part of the statistics of the increase of late preterm infants.
Because often they're induced and...
Yep, exactly.
So in this situation, this questioner, yes, I'm an answerer, is asking about...
We're well good at this.
Is asking about the situation where twin 1 is breech.
Yes.
Which is a little bit more tricky. So twin births tend to work fine. despite all of the things that we throw at them. In fact, when they mess up, it's usually because, once again, we get women on epidural on their back and, fiddle on and create a mess and then go, see, they're really dangerous. But with a baby that's coming out bottom first and then another baby that's coming out head first, the key risk that everybody focuses on, which is why cesarean is recommended, is this locked twin situation, which is where twin one's head gets locked with twin two. And that's absolutely catastrophic. You've got 30% of babies don't make it when that happens. So that's what everybody's worried about. And there isn't research into this because it's probably not ethical, because cesarean has been offered since it's been available for this situation when it's known. The only time that babies tend to come out with a breech head first is when it's unexpected. Yeah. And there are, so there's case studies where people have seen that happen and written about it. And it tends to be prem babies that didn't have good outcomes. But that's one form of evidence, but we don't have good research evidence, except to say that 1 in 88 breech cephalic twins will encounter this problem. So I would say, if this is a situation that a woman's in, then she really needs to talk to her care providers about what's going on individually for her and her babies, and what are the risks specific for her and what really she wants to do.
Absolutely. Great answer, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
You're welcome, listener. Questioner.
Answer it.
I think we've got time for one more question for both of us. We've had quite a lot of questions which have centered around a central theme of really how we work within the system. And so me and Rachel...
No surprises there.
No surprises there, indeed. So me and Rachel have talked about this before anyway, and we are going to do a whole podcast on this for you, because we think it deserves the time and it needs the time. So if you feel like your question hasn't been answered during this episode, we will be getting to it, and a whole episode of this will be coming up soon. So, Rachel, a question probably for both of us. I'd love to hear your perspectives on the philosophy of why midwives' perspectives on caesarean sections are so negative. I practice within a small unit where the push for normal birth is the be-all and end-all, and shame is put upon you for the caesarean section. I feel so passionately about this topic, as I believe through the push to normalize, some midwives have forgotten the essence behind why we do what we do.
I love this question. Oh, that's an unusual situation to be in. Most midwives are working in hospitals where there's a real push for medicalization. I've just finished, I'm actually editing my book at the moment, and I've got a whole chapter on medical birth rights. And in that chapter, I talk about the midwives, so what midwives used to do is they were invited to birth because of their ability to identify and manage complications. And then that's been taken away from us by medicalization and obstetricians. So we've then really crafted our identity in being able to support and promote physiology, which actually used to be what all women could do at a birth, but actually midwives would have been the experts in that, in terms of which herbs to use and which blah, blah. So we've really clung to that identity. And the ICM even, have put it in writing that this is the midwifery philosophy is all about, promoting and supporting physiological birth, etc., which I totally agree with, because when physiological birth most of the time works well and has the best outcomes, but not for all women. And as midwives working in modern birth care, we also need to embrace what I call the rights of protection, which is kind of the actions and skills that are around minimizing risk for women, and minimizing danger, and supporting women who are having medical birth for whatever reason. Women have medical births for all kinds of reasons. Yes, coercion. Yes, because they haven't made informed decisions. Yes, because we've done things to them. But actually, some women have them because they have medical complications, and without intervention, they or their baby would die. Or women choose to have medical intervention. And as midwives, we are with woman, and I think this is really important for us to remember. And there needs to be a little bit of reclaiming around that part of our entity, that we are ultimately with woman, however her birth unfolds. There shouldn't be a right way to birth a baby. Only the focus should be on how does that woman feel coming out of her birth.
Exactly.
So from my perspective, I can understand why midwives are clinging to this promotion of physiology as their identity, because it is our identity. And we need to now start to reclaim those aspects of midwifery that were actually around being with woman, regardless of how that birth happens, and stop judging each other and stop judging women. So Katie, what's your perspective on?
My perspective is exactly the same as yours, actually. It's about seeing that woman as an individual and looking at where she is in her headspace, where she feels safe. And it goes back to the essentials of, being a mammal. And when you feel safe is where you're going to have the best birth experience. And so if I look at it from a postnatal perspective, it's about the birth that she felt most in control of and she felt that was right for her. That might have been a planned cesarean because of all of the other stuff that comes with her along her journey, trauma, abuse, whatever that might be, or not, or just fear from living in our Western society that puts so much fear within women around birth. And for me, it almost goes back to the making judgment of whether you choose not to have children or not as a midwife. I'm there to support women without making judgment. I completely want to be able to give them the information that's correct. And again, it's about giving them the correct information so they feel in control to make an informed decision. But my job is to support her and her wishes with good information and knowing and listening to her. I have to see and listen what she's telling me, because that's important. And that's about being with woman. And that's when she will come out at the other end and feel that she's had a positive birth experience. So that's where I come from. And I think it's exactly the same as you. But again, in terms of our midwifery sphere, to put shame upon other midwives, I think we need to make sure that we're looking at this in the right direction. And it is all about being with women and supporting their choices and giving them good support and information and not judging each other.
And there's no shame in supporting a woman as her birth unfolds in the way that she needs to be supported and wherever that ends up. There should be actually congratulations for a good transfer from a home birth into a hospital birth in order to get medical support. There should be congratulations on that was a good call to have a cesarean section.
Yeah.
In that. So yeah, I can see why midwives do it. And also we need to get away from this trying to reduce the cesarean section rate thing. That's the other thing, is this real focus on reducing cesarean sections, which misses the important thing, which is how about promoting and supporting physiology, but also, looking at outcomes in terms of how women feel at the end of their birth experience. Did they feel supported? Did they feel that they were actually the expert in their own body and baby? And was that respected by the people looking after them? Because that actually makes more impact on women postnatally than whether or not the baby comes out by cesarean or by vagina.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Wonderful. So that's put that to rights. Great. Right. Last question.
I love your podcast so much. See, that's why we're asking this question.
Whoop. Thank you. If you start a question like that, we'll always answer.
I've been thinking of studying midwifery, but after doing a lot of researching, reading and listening to many podcasts in the last year, I've felt discouraged and doubtful after hearing many very negative stories about the midwifery system and culture, birth intervention, the rise of inductions, etc. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this, or any advice you would have for someone in this position. Granted, I've been listening to quite a few US-based podcasts, and I know things differ a lot from country to country. Yes, they do. I would be studying in either New Zealand or the UK. In the US, I've been hearing a lot about people free birthing as a means to avoid the system, and I don't know what to think of this, as I do really want to believe in midwifery.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of going for the doula route instead, which may be better suited for me, or at least may first be a good initiation into this work. I get asked this, well, a shortened version of that quite often is, should I be a midwife or a doula? Or, how people worried about stepping into midwifery because they've actually looked at it before they've stepped in. I get more students who come in without actually looking at it and then go, oh my God, I've just stepped into it.
That was me.
A shitstorm. I would say, look, it's very different, and nobody can say this is where you would fit best. I would talk to midwives who are working in the areas that you want to end up being in, and talk to doulas.
Yep.
And ask them, what is their work like? What does their day look like? Ask the midwives.
Yeah.
And you're right. You could, a lot of midwives start the doula route and then go into midwifery. You can't really do it the other way around as easily, because once you're a midwife, once you're registered, you can hand your registration in, but you will still be seen in the eyes of the law as a midwife. So you can get into all kinds of trouble if you're attending births, because you're considered to be a midwife, and if you're not, so that's not an easy way to do it. So if you're going to do one and then the other,
that's a good
do
point
doula
to
and
know.
then move.
Definitely.
And it's not going to do you any harm starting a doula course and learning a bit about birth and what the system's like.
Absolutely. I would totally agree with you. And I think whenever you're considering this type of course, because it is a career and it's, we call it a vocation, but it's the more information you can get from people. And also when you're going through your studies, latch on, not literally, but latch on to those people who you really...
Lactation consultant.
Yeah. Oh God, of course. You find those people who are, you see them as like they're strong midwives. They are knowledgeable, they're caring, they practice in the way that you want to practice. And you are, of course, going to encounter practices which really make you feel uncomfortable, or they turn you off, or you think, do you know what? I'm going to take that, I'm going to learn from it, and I'm never going to do that again. So surround yourself with the people who lift you up and build your confidence. And I think the only way to know is just like Rachel said, talking to people from both worlds. But that's a really interesting point about being a midwife first and then kind of going into the doula world, that you're always seen as a midwife and it could be complex. Good point. I didn't even think of that, actually.
And you could get yourself into legal trouble.
Yeah.
Practicing midwifery when you're not registered because you've handed your registration in.
Whoa.
It can get messy.
Talk to brilliant midwives out there. So, that's why you're listening to this podcast and why you love us. So that's that's all you need to know.
The US is very different to New Zealand and the UK. New Zealand and the UK are actually pretty similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But different enough to, if you're going, I'm not sure which one, then go and talk to midwives in the UK and talk to midwives in New Zealand and ask them, because they'll tell you what's going on in the system and whether or not it's something you want to step into.
Also, look at people who are working in bigger units compared to smaller units. My experience was vastly different from the hospitals that I've worked in. So again, it comes down to the unit itself and their philosophy and how they function and what they offer. Like what type of midwifery models do they offer? So I don't think midwifery is totally one box. There's lots of different options that are out there. So don't feel too compartmentalized.
No, but bear in mind that if you study midwifery, you will be limited in whatever program you do to your placement. So you might have to kind of suck it up to get to get graduated, so you can then go and work in the setting that you kind of see yourself in long term.
So a great question to wrap up with. And I just want to say thank you for sending in your questions. I hope you have enjoyed this podcast. It's been really fun listening to them, and you've given us ideas for future podcasts. So enjoy, and we will see you at the next Midwives Cauldron podcast. So there we go. We've answered your questions. Surely there can't be any more, can there? Me and Rachel are receiving amazing feedback, questions and comments from you guys all the time on the Instagram, and it is just marvelous. We have so many questions that sometimes we can't actually get round to answering them all. So what we've decided to do is we will have a regular segment in our podcast where we answer your specific questions. And sometimes if it comes up with a really great one, we might make it a whole podcast. So continue to listen, subscribe, please share it with your friends and leave us a comment on your podcast platform because we love hearing them. And make sure you find us on Instagram at the Midwives Cauldron. And we look forward to seeing you at the next episode. And of course, as always, here's some bloopers. Can you, something's like making this, and I think it might be the wire that is maybe, as you move, rustling on something.
Is that better?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. So if I just keep this still and stop.
Oh no, it's like
jigging about. Is it still there? Is it not the cicadas?
Oh yeah, it's the cicadas. It's like this in my ears. It's like this.
Yes, the cicadas. There you go.
Okay, I can't stop that.
Sorry, can't do anything about the cicadas.
Nature.
Oi, shut up!
Shut up, cicadas. Bloody hell. Sorry, listeners. Just got to listen to a bit of nature. I mean, I'm not exactly Mary Poppins here. I don't have any magic up my sleeve, so I need a bit more time.
Do you have a spoonful of sugar?
I try it. I definitely try it. Spoonful of sugar.
Makes the medicine go down.
Absolutely.
And that's another song.
And that's another song.
It's dangerous having me holding a microphone like this. Way too much like karaoke.
Just a spoonful of sugar sorts the nipple problems out.
Reedy says me dinner's ready, man.
Hey, Reed, go eat your dinner, love.
I'll read.
Been up for an ages. Love you. Ciao. See ya.